Thank you very much. Thank you very much, my friends. This is a very noble opportunity for me to share my lifetime's work on Jasma Bodhiya. My proper official work started with Jasma Bodhiya in 1980. It continues up to date. And as you can see, most of you have been near the Jasma Bodhi in Vahanse, and this is the proper Jasma Bodhi in Vahanse that exists today. And the large tree that is nearby is a Parivara Bodhiya, and I will speak about this by showing more slides of what I have done in and around the Bodhi in Vahanse. This is one of the ceremonial days when the Bodhi Puja or Mal Puja has been done. And this is a very rare sight now, and also it's not, many people are not allowed to go to the top when the ceremonial activities are on. I joined the Botanic Gardens as a public servant in December 1975, but before that, I was a research scientist attached to the Botanical Gardens for 2 years from 1973 onwards. And my responsibilities were research into the plants of the country. And that really took me right around the country during that entire period. Plus, of course, it goes on up to date. When I joined the Botanical Gardens, I was my superior was Mr. D.T. Ekanayaka, Don Thomas Ekanayaka. He was called the superintendent of Botanic Gardens. And then, of course, in 1975, when I joined the Botanic Gardens, I started my work at Peradeniya Gardens officially. And very quickly, I was transferred to Aggala Gardens to improve it and look after it during the time of Mrs. Sirima Bandaranayaka, when the Non-Aligned Nations Conference came up. And of course, quite quickly, I was brought back to Peradeniya because the second in command, Mr. Tenakon, retired from service, and then I had to be brought back to Peradeniya. Of course, at that time, the United National Party has come into power. And the man who took a lot of interest in the Botanic Gardens was none other than late Governor, Honorable E.S. Seranayaka, as the Minister of Agriculture. He went into these botanical gardens because it is in his electorate. And he personally had a lot of liking to the place, and he knew the value of the place. And he looked into the future of these gardens and suddenly realized it was Mr. D.T. Ekanayaka was to retire in 2 years' time, and the next in command was me. And I have not had any formal training, and he was responsible for sending me to the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew for my training. So I went to the Botanical Gardens in Kew in England in 1980 for my training. Did all the kinds of necessary attention that are required, because by that time, I did realize that when I come back, I might have to head the Botanical Gardens, and my responsibilities were to look after Jasma Bodhi in Vahanse, as well as most of the other Botanic Gardens and the historic trees of Sri Lanka. So I spent quite a lot of my time talking to the scientists and working with them, because the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew, most of you have been there, I suppose, have trees planted from 1670s. So they are regularly looked after, cared for, and very well analyzed. And I went with this curator during my tenure of that time with Kew Gardens, and during my time at the University of Reading, spent more time in looking after this, because I knew the Jasma Bodhi Vahanse was already facing a lot of problems. That I knew before I left the country. So this, of course, most of you have seen the famous farmhouse of the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew. I just want to mention that this was the place I really collected all my knowledge, experience, and the nitty-gritty bits in caring the both trees. This is, I just want to pay a tribute to the late Atamasthanaadhipati Pallegama Jnanaratan Nayaka Thero, who was Atamasthanaadhipati from 1980 to 1997. He is the one who really started and allowed me to undertake this work, supported me, and also gave me all the blessings and also the kind of guidance that are required to get the proper job done. Of course, on the other side is the Venerable Pallegama Sri Sumanarayota Srinivasa Nayak Thero, the incumbent Atamasthana Adhipati, 1997 onwards. He has done enormous amount of work for the Jasma Bodhiya Mahanse and also to the temple and its development. Now, this, most of you would not have seen this picture. This is a bird's eye view of the Jasma Bodhiya Mahanse. One on the scene, where I'm turning my cursor, you see the Vihara gate, and on about that, there are 7 maluas or 7 levels of Bodhiya, the maluas on which the Jasma Bodhiya Mahanse is situated. I personally made measurements about 2 years ago, and this is how it goes. Now, what I say at the bottommost is the Vihara Malua, which is the sand Malua, right? And then 13 feet above that is where Devala Malua is. And Devala Malua is where we go and offer our flowers. And these people who chant all the blessings to the people, our Rajakari people are there. And then, of course, 7 feet above that is where we had the second Rainwater, which is a new one, right? And of course, another 7 feet above that is the first Rainwater that was built in 1960s. And then, of course, we go on to 3 other maluas on top. And with the uppermost one is what is called the Vadasitina Malua, where the Jasma Bodhiya is situated. Now, that's what is predicted here. This is properly measured by an architect. When we started development programs, we got it done. We are getting the levels properly done back again into a more sophisticated form. So one of the main problems when I got back and before I went to UK also was that the Bodhiya Mahanse was getting, the leaves of the Bodhiya Mahanse was continuously getting smaller and smaller, which means that there was some other problems were there, which we could not analyze at that time. And also the Bodhiya Mahanse was getting a lot of infections with fungi quite often. And also there are a lot of insect infestations showing that the Bodhiya Mahanse was getting a little weak. So this was prior to my departure. And then, of course, I generally observed that there was a condition of malnutrition. But it was too early. And my boss, Mr. D.T. Ekanayak, was a very senior person, but who was really not a risk taker. He was extremely careful with whatever he did. All what he did was he sprayed the Bodhiya Mahanse regularly with fertilizers like Maxicrop and kept on adding a gunny bag of compost from Peradini Gardens. He fumigated that and took it in. When he went there once in 3 or 4 months, he added that soil. But of course, this was not enough. So when I came back from England, what I did was I brought this up because, of course, very quickly I became the head of the Botanic Gardens. And I took up this Jasma Bodhiya Mahanse and the problem of that. And then, of course, I was very lucky. The Director of Agriculture under whom the Botanic Gardens stood at that time was Dr. Chris Parnabokke, one of the world-renowned botanists on soil scientists. And then, of course, he was very helpful in undertaking all these studies that I wanted to undertake. So what we did was, we dug some pits, I'll show you in slides. And then, of course, Dr. Parnabokke was heading some of the scientific advisory work for me and analysis of soil. When we dug the pits and we analyzed the soil, we found that the Substratum was 80 to 90% sand. I'll show you in pictures. And then, of course, I'll show you where the roots were. They were in very thin soils, right? So Dr. Panabokke was the then Director of Agriculture. He's a world-renowned soil scientist. He himself advised on the investigation methodologies to be adopted. He's still living. He's in his 95 or 96 now. He's now shifted to Kandy, living with his daughter. Dr. Chris Panabokke was the chief advisor, and he got me two other scientists, Dr. S. Somasiri. He's Dr. Late Somasiri now, is no more. Mr. Deepal Gangodavilla, another research officer under the Soil Sciences Department, and they joined me in analyzing this soil. So we took this responsibility, and with advice from the Nayaka Hamduro, I had to go through so many other stages, which I have written in the book, but now I'm not going to talk about it. I had to go up to the level of the Atamasthana committee, and then what is called the political committee, which was headed by none other than Mr. KDMC Bandara, the district minister at that time, who looked at it and said, Mr. Sumitraracachi, it is best that we get the approval of His Excellency the President. At that time was Jaya. And then, of course, I was very lucky because all the President's house gardens were coming under the Botanic Gardens. It was very easy for me to approach Mr. The President at that time. I gave a call to Mr. C.D. Silva, who was his private secretary at that time. He fixed an appointment for me, and then I went and saw him. And he listened to me for a long time, and asked me very, very tough questions. And all that story I have put in my book in Sinhalese. That is a very interesting story. Finally, he gave me his blessings. He said, young man, you can do it. But remember, if anything were to go wrong, the Buddhists of this country will pinch you to death. So remember that. I said, then of course, he said, with this advice, you have to take this very seriously and undertake the work and report to me every 2 weeks what is happening. So this is the first stage in 1983, where in the uppermost Malua, this is Dr. Somasiri, who is seated here. This is Mr. Deepal Gangoda, who is the other research officer who was here. This is one of my officers with whom I worked at that time. This gentleman here was the secretary of the Atamasthana committee, Mr. Jayanta Disanayaka. And this work went on. We took on this work and dug down to 9 feet in the uppermost Malua to see what the soil was like. If you can see this soil, the profile, you can, it's all full of sand. And occasionally there have been some soil, which is probably red-brown soil, right? It's sand, all the way down it's sand. And you can see right at the bottom, the Salapatala Maluo came up. And then that 9 foot, I decided to stop this and reported back to Dr. Panabokke. He said, that is enough. And then we took some soil profile. You can see the little bit of soil that was there. And you can see the roots only there. And there were no roots anywhere else. So this was one of the main reasons why the Jasma Bodhi Mahanse was getting weak, because it was not receiving its due nutrition. This is a profile that we dug. This is 9 feet. This is part of the 9 feet of soil profile. Dr. Panabokke looked at all these things, analyzed all the soils, and then finally he came up with something called, the entire soil scientist came up with the recommendation that was corresponding with another study that we carried out. The other study we carried out was with Mr. Deepal Gangodavilla and one of my curators, Mr. MMP Bandara. I sent them around the dry zone districts to find out the areas where the boat trees are growing in natural or near natural situations. And I wanted them to undertake the soil in these areas, analyze them, and to recommend to the committee what the soil types were. Finally, these two were matched by Dr. Panabokke and Dr. Somasiri and came up with the recommendation that the most appropriate most appropriate soil for the Bodhiyas is what we call the red-brown earth of the dry zone. So that's the soil type that was recommended here. And then, of course, we had to take the red-brown earth from natural areas and also only the topsoil. We could not take the subsoil in those areas. And we were very lucky. At that time, the government agent Anuradhapura was Mr. T.K. Dasanayaka, and he himself had just received 26 new tractors and trailers for Mahaveli work. He was also in this committee. He immediately said, I have these brand new tractors and the trailers for the to bring the soils from these 46 sites. And then we brought 26 tractor loads. We used these 26 tractor loads. We brought 46 tractor loads of earth. And then, of course, the Dr. Ginasiri Fernando, who was at that time was the scientist in charge of pesticides, who later became the Director General of Agriculture, was a wonderful scientist. And he himself undertook the control and fumigation of these soils. And we fumigated all these 46 tractor loads of soil inside the Banamaduas. And then we had to safeguard that soil because nobody knew how I was going to change this entire soil of the largest potted plant in the world. Of course, the next thing was the Nayaka Hamduro came up with an auspicious time on the 30th May 1985. And as you can see, at 6:37 a.m., this was the auspicious moment where the Atamasthana, the Nayaka Hamduro, really laid the soil from the soil that we brought in. And this is Mr. Deepal Gangoda. And of course, this is something called Luku Hamduro. Most of you who would have been associated with Sri Maha Bodhiya would remember him. He used to come for all the pujas of the Malu. And these are the, this is the Nayaka Hamduro himself putting the next bit of soil. And of course, you can see that he was thoroughly involved in the entire subject. I would like you to notice at this time, by the way, this is Mr. T.K. Dasanayak, the government agent of Anuradhapura, and these are the monks of the temple, Udamalua. These are the Rajakari people. And of course, I would like you to notice this little sapling that is here. This was a sapling that had been planted by my predecessor because he was a little worried over the years because the Bodhi Mahansa was getting weak. I would also like you to notice this particular branch, right? This small branch, and I'll show you what has happened after a few years. Now, this is so once we started really cleaning up the place and washing all the soil, this little sapling came out. It really came out. And to see, that was a sapling that was planted on that place, thinking that the Jaya Maha Bodhi, if something were to happen to Jaya Maha Bodhi Vahanse, this would take the place. But with my experience of 40 years, I know that Jaya Maha Bodhi Vahanse is a miraculous living plant. It's a living Dhamma, living Buddha, living everything. So nothing would happen to a Jaya Maha Bodhi Vahanse because as predicted by Moggali Puttasisa Maharatan Vahanse and also Mihindu Maharatan Vahanse and Buddharajan Vahanse himself, this will go on for 5,000 years. Of course, with what I want to show you, these two slides was, I wanted you to draw attention to this particular branch, right, which I'm running the cursor. This was in the picture in 1985. After all these treatments, this picture, which I took in 2015, shows the same branch after receiving all the nutrients that we have been giving, as is becoming the future Bodhin Vahanse of Jaya Maha Bodhi Vahanse. So I'll show you more pictures of that as we go on, but I would like you to notice this particular, this comparison. These are the pictures that followed for the next 2 weeks. That's we had to wash all the soil from the top Udamaluva down to the ground level and prepare the Bodhisattva and the Udamaluva to bring in the new soil, new nutritive soil for the Bodhisattva. And this is myself. This is myself at work here. And also, most of you who have met the Ruwannavisaya Nayaka Handuro, Ape Hemaratana Nayaka Handuro is here 43, 45 years ago. Very, very thin priest. And here's me right at work at the Jasma Bodhisattva. All the other scientists. So we were very busy washing the soil for almost, we washed the soil almost 1 week, day and night, in small pieces. Like if you take a round piece of cake, it's like cutting pieces of cake and washing one piece out, then washing another piece out from the opposite side. And that's how we removed the soil that was already there. We could not use any utensils because the use of utensils would cut the roots of the important Bodhisattva. So what I saw after that, now these are the technicalities of taking the soil out of this place, right? We had to lay pipelines and wash them through these pipelines down to the lower levels and keep it open. And this is what happened. You can see a lot of people were using utensils where we were quite sure that there were no roots, right? And these are the areas where we use water jets to clean. And this is all the workers of the botanical gardens. There were 25 workers that I took from the botanical gardens. They were the lucky ones who could really serve the Bodhisattva, which means it was really serving the Lord Buddha. And these people worked for 10 days continuously, cleaning, removing the soil, and then bringing them back. This is the Ruwannavisaya Nayaka Handuro in 1985. He was very, very thin at that time, very young priest. And this is the Parivara Bodhiya that I showed you earlier. And as you can see, these are the roots from the Parivara Bodhiya that has gone towards Jasma Bodhisattva. You can see that more clearly in this picture. All the nutrients that we were putting to Jasma Bodhisattva were being absorbed by the Parivara Bodhisattva regularly. And as a result, the Jasma Bodhisattva was continuously suffering from two ends. One was the Parivara Bodhisattva was absorbing all the nutrients that we were supplying to the Jasma Bodhisattva, number one. Number two, the soil, the substratum on which the Bodhisattva was growing was also extremely poor in condition. So I had to tackle both these situations, right? And of course, at that time, there was no question of passing the buck. It was me, and I had to take my own decisions on the side. And with the Nayaka Hamduru, I made certain decisions. So one of the main decisions that I made was remove these parasitic roots from the Jasma Bodhisattva, and these are taking nutrients to the Parivara Bodhiya. And these are the kinds of roots that I removed, and that was one of the major activities that I undertook at that time. I'll just show you two more things. Now, these how the roots of the Parivara Bodhiya has come under this is Jasma Bodhiya. It has come just there and removing all the nutrients from immediate base of the Jasma Bodhisattva. So this is what happened after I removed the roots. You can see that the Parivara Bodhiya is here, and all the roots are now removed. And then, of course, what I did was I put a big concrete in between. Now, while doing this, I was able to discover, come to this picture, this is after washing down about 2 feet of earth. This is a big cut that has been done by a person called Katuavala James. I'll show you that again here. This is what Katuavala James, who cut the Jasma Bodhisattva in 1929 on the 29th of July, right? And this is a picture from that picture. And this is the resurgence of that same situation, same cut in 1985 after 56 years. So, and also as you can see, still this picture is showing the roots from the Parivara Bodhiyas around the base of the Jasma Bodhi. So what we did was, finally, we dug a big separator between the Jasma Bodhi in Vahanse and the Parivara Bodhiyas, and I managed to put a big concrete separator. That's me seated there. That's Hemaratan Nayakahanduru, and these are the people who worked with us. And that's, we were putting the concrete just to separate out, and that's how it all happened. So this is Lankarama Nayakahanduru. Most of you probably know him, right? And this Nayakahanduru is watching, and they were all helping here. That's me at work, putting this separator between the Jasma Bodhi in Vahanse and the Parivara Bodhi. And these are the pictures, that more pictures of the same thing. Of course, that's the final product of the separator between the Parivara Bodhi and the Jasma Bodhi, so that the future parasitic action will not be permitted through the Parivara Bodhi. This is all the workers who were involved at that time. And these are my workers from the botanical gardens. And this is Hemaratan Nayakahanduru. This is Dhammajoti Nayakahanduru, Lankarama Nayakahanduru, this is Deepal. These are my officers and my workers. And of course, I was taking most of these pictures myself. Very rarely I appeared in one or two pictures. So that's one group picture. And this is one of the things that was happening regularly. Every 3 to 4 hours, the Atamasthanathipati Nayakahanduru would walk to the top. He would bring me a flask of plain tea, and he would bring all the cool drinks he would send cool drinks to all the workers. Every 3 to 4 hours, he used to come and see what was going on. And it was an encouragement, and we were able to make decisions on site in order to look after this great big tree. After all these activities, I realized, of course, all these earth, all these where the Hamdurus are standing, they were all changed completely over a period of 3 years. And then completely, the entire Udamalu was refilled with fertile soil after removing the sandy soil, after washing them down, and we refilled. That entire activity took over 3 years. After doing all that, what I did was, instead of putting all other sand, I started planting Undupiyali on top, because Undupiyali, in my opinion, provided a very new, novel situation to the base of the Jasma Bodhi in Vahanse, because this would not take up the sunlight and keep the heat. It will take up the sunlight and turn it into food. As most of you know, the photosynthesis would go on. And also, in addition to that, the Undupiyali being a legume, it will return some nutrient through its root nodules onto the substratum. So this is after a few years of, about 5 years after I started the work, I planted the entire Udamalu with this thing. And of course, quite regularly now, every 3 to 5 years, we replenish the topsoil, we check the soil pH or the soil acidity, and also we recondition the soil by adding dolomite and other nutrients. And then we add this soil, the mixing of soil with all the Rajakari people, and we sieve the soil and also make sure that no pathogens come in. Right? We first fumigate the soil and bring it up, then mix it with dolomite and all the other pH balancing requirements. And we do test these things. And then, of course, we add this soil to this place. That's me. In this process of adding this, we cut these pits, right? And then keep on adding all this soil. These are all the Rajakari people, right? Of the Atamasthane. And they all assist us in this thing. Of course, in this work, the most important thing has been, I never deployed other people to do this. I was involved in doing this by myself all these 44, now it's 44 years. I've been sort of involved in it. Now, one of the things I want to show you, that the Jasma Bodhiya Mahansa has undergone in 1942 was a twist. Now, the Jasma Bodhiya Mahansa was one long, elongated arm that first grew northwards and then eastwards. This particular branch, as you can see, that's how it has grown, right? In 1942, according to the records, I went and dug out all the records and found that the botanical gardens officers and the Department of Agriculture people and the Puliyankulama farm people were very busy from 1942 onwards trying to attend to some wounds of the Bodhiya. Now that wound is a wound that has really cracked because the Bodhiya Mahansa has gone into something called a clockwise twist due to the strong winds. And that clockwise twist brought this particular crack. Now you can see it even today. This crack is still there, right? And of course, what has happened in 1963, this is a picture from 1963 from the archives in the Botanical Gardens. What Mr. Jaya and the agriculture people that done at that time was put some reinforced steel wires and put some concrete into this just to make the Bodhiya Mahansa stable. Otherwise, it was possible that the Bodhiya Mahansa was going to collapse. Now, what you see here is the same concrete. If I show you the bottom side, now this is the same thing, right? If you look at it, you can see it from the bottom side also, that crack is. So my biggest problem of ours is to look out to the Bodhiya Mahansa, because this concrete core is right in the center of the Bodhiya Mahansa, this branch. Can you see? You can see that there's a huge concrete right in between the main trunk. So whatever we do at the base, the problem is there is a gateway through which the nutrients can pass. So as a result, you see, the nutrition was not going. But with this treatment, I showed you that branch earlier, and this is the branch that was very small during our treatment time. It has now become big. I'll show you more pictures later on. Now it's really big, right? This is a picture from 2016. And this concrete cannot be done. But of course, if you compare the earlier pictures and present day pictures, you can see that this bark has grown quite tremendously. I just go back to this one picture I showed you earlier. I should have put this picture in the position. Just a minute. Now, if you look at this picture, the skin is very, very different. It's not fat. But if you look at the skin around the concrete in this picture, you can see it's bulging now. It's become fat, right? This is after the treatments that we undertook in 1985. So looking after Jasma Bodhiya Mahansa has been a kind of a God-given gift. And also, I always feel that it's not a botanist who is at work. It is that we are being guided by the Almighty somewhere. So therefore, these are the things that are very, very important for you all to know. I don't think anybody knows that there's a concrete in between the Jasma Bodhiya Mahansa main trunk. Right? That's the main branch, the future branch. This is the young priest who is looking after the Bodhiya and attending to it. Sri Ratana Handru, a very pious priest who is all the time attending to Jasma Bodhiya and Mahansa full time. So of course, that's the kind of things that we have seen. But of course, in the past and even in the present, right, Jasma Bodhiya Mahansa is subject to many, many, many natural disasters. On the 9th of October 1994, 9 days before Chandrika Bandarana became the president, Jasma Bodhiya Mahansa suffered a major setback. One of the main branches of the Bodhiya Mahansa collapsed, right? Due to strong wind that came, and only this branch came down completely collapsed. And that's where it was. It was going upwards like that. And on that day it collapsed. And then, of course, I had to travel midnight itself, early morning. I went and had a look at the tree, and the branches were completely down. And the then Minister of Agriculture was Dimu Jayaratna. I spoke to him over the phone, and then he was in a place called in Gaul. He was attending to some political matter. I told him, sir, there is a problem like this, and it looks like it's difficult to save that particular branch. He said, no, in a few days' time, we are going to have the presidential elections. So I want you to somehow save it. I said, sir, it is impossible because it's completely separated. Then, of course, with difficulty, I was able to convince him that I would have to attend to it the way it had to be done. And then, of course, in the night, I immediately Nayakahandro summoned the Atamasthana committee, and we took a decision to remove that all the branches that are collapsed, and then we took action to remedy that place. And then, of course, once that with this place, as it became very weak, there's another large portion of the Bodhiya onto the distal side from here. And then what happened was my hunch was during times of rain, when the leaves collect a lot of water, and if the winds come with a weak main stem here, the rest of the branch also can collapse. So I told this to the Atamasthana committee, and they asked me what to do. I said, well, we'll have to think of a different mechanism. And what we did was, we came out with various engineers came out with various concrete pillars and so on and so forth. So my solution was to bring up a pillar from down ground level, a thing like this, above the level of the Jasma Bodhiya, put a truss right across and hang the Bodhi in one's last bit of the branch, just like this. You might be able to see some of these chains. There's a triangular kind of a support, and these three chains are hanging the distal part of the Bodhi in one's. The crack is somewhere here. So if this were to catch strong wind, and at a time of heavy rains, if the leaves are carrying a lot of water, which means adding water, the Bodhi in one's can collapse from here. So what I did was, I made this kind of tortilla-like thing, a suspension-like thing, and then hung it at the end of this truss. And then now, for the last so many years, the Bodhi in Mahansa is quite happily staying there. So that's now, this happened in 1994. Now we are in 2022, that is 22 and 6, 28 years. This tortilla and the suspension system has sustained the Bodhi in Mahansa. Not only it has sustained the Bodhi in Mahansa, these branches has grown tremendously well. Another important thing that happened that you all must, you all probably know, and some of you may not know, was on the 12th of December 2004. Suddenly early in the morning, the Rajakari people have come running to the Nayakahandru and told that the wall collapsed. Right? And these are the pictures of the wall. This is where the Yatika Malua is, where the Yatikas are held by the Rajakari people. That's how it collapsed. And of course, immediately Nayakahandru called Mr. K.J. Vijayadasa, who was the president, the chairman of the Srima Bodhiya committee at the Rainwater committee at that time. He immediately summoned very eminent scientists like Gamanu Silva, Rohana Silva, and all those people, and all the other engineers. And we went there, and of course, immediately action was taken to remove that part of the wall. And then immediately Mr. Vijayadasa summoned the meeting and asked us, the scientific committee, what do you think of this? Is Malua good enough? So of course, the answer was the Malua was not big enough. Nayakahandru was of the same opinion. It's the present Nayakahandru, Atamasthana that happened during his time. And then, of course, this entire Udamalua was expanded. This is the present Udamalua after all that expansion. The Udamalua was expanded by 7 feet on all the sides. And completely new galvators were built, and all these were done by the Puravidya department's recommendations. And then, of course, along with that, Mr. Vijayadasa and Nayakahandru decided that there was the first Rainwater was the gold Rainwater done by Yatravana Hamduru. And then, of course, a second Rainwater was done by, under this Nayak Hamduru, under the patronage of Mr. K.J. Vijayadasa. That was done very well. And that the Yakadavata was removed, the iron railing was removed, and the second Rainwater was done. And then the entire Udamalu was developed to a much larger space. So now, in fact, these stairs were made by none other than I like to use that name because I like to pay tribute to Mr. Vikramasinghe of Star Granite. This entire flight of steps is, he carved it in his workshops in Kurunagal somewhere. And this is made out of just one rock, one stone. All the three main paddy pillars on the three sides are just one stone. And then he brought them in massive lorries into the thing. This is that tripod that we were talking about that I built to suspend the Bodhin Mahanse. That comes from the ground level and goes right to the top. So that's the Jasma Bodhin Mahanse present day situation. And of course, we did so many things. If those of you have been there would see that the entire the Srima Bodhiya, all the gallbatters have been renewed. And this was funded by none other than Vishwaparami Foundation. The gold railings were funded by them. In fact, we have not been allowed to use their name. Of course, occasionally I use it in situations like this. Mr. Prabhat Nanayakara is a very pious meditating Buddhist, and he's right now meditating. When I left UK a month ago, he was in England in a meditation center for almost a month. He was meditating. So he is into all these things, and without any hesitation, he spent all the money required to bring up these places. So this is the present day Atamasta, the Udamalu. So these are the other pictures of the Udamalu. This is the Jasma Bodhin Mahanse, as you can see here, right? This is Jasma Bodhin Mahanse. This is the Parivara Bodhiya. So you can see how strong the Parivara Bodhi is. Now the Parivara Bodhiya has been built by the Atamastana Devati Nayaka Handuru was decades ago, not decades, centuries ago, in order to camouflage the Bodhin Mahanse. Because if somebody were to come and damage the Bodhin Mahanse, they would mistake the Bodhin Mahanse to this Parivara Bodhiya because it is the big one. But the real Bodhin Mahanse is the small Bodhiya that is around. All these, once you go there, you can see all these golden pillars are there supporting the Bodhin Mahanse, right? Now, Bodhin Mahanse doesn't go just like that. It meets, there are lots of diseases and pests. Now, when it gives a new flush once a year, and when the leaves fall and the new flush comes, this is how they look like, very beautiful. But with the wet weather, if the wet weather comes, this is what happens. They would get something called the black spots, right? This is a particular fungus called Glomerilla cingulata, right? And this would infect the leaves. And then if the situation gets bad, the leaves, the petioles would also get the fungus, and then the leaves will fall. But of course, I tell them, Hamduros, not to worry, because we tried all kinds of combinations of fungicides. Nothing has worked so far. This particular fungus is airborne. So when the wet weather comes, the fungus enters the leaves through the stomata on the underside of the leaf. And then it would give these black spots that you see. And once it becomes a black spot, it cannot be treated because this fungus is inside. Whatever the fungicide we spray, come on the cuticle and doesn't go in. So that's what happens. And then, of course, there are certain other things. That's one of the main things that happens. In fact, at any time on all your temples, if the Bodhiyas put new flush during wet weather, you would observe this phenomenon. But of course, it will drop the leaves, and after some time, when the dry weather comes back, the Bodhiya will put the leaves back again, the proper leaves. So not to worry. This is another insect that has emerged over the last nearly 8 years. We didn't see this insect before that. This is the kind of symptoms that appears. the leaves they get rolled. This happens when the young flush comes, and if the completely dry weather comes, this happens, right? The leaves appear like squashed, and then of course, this is the kind of insect that comes. So I managed to ask Professor Sarath Kotagama, my batchmate, to come to Sri Maha Bodhiya and look at this. And then he collected samples, and then he took them under the microscope. And this is a picture Professor Kotagama, Sarath Kotagama produced for me recently. And he said he's still not been able to identify this particular insect, but this infestation is going around very badly all over the country. If the new flush comes, if the dry weather comes, this happens. This, of course, is your well-known whitefly. It comes onto all your araliya trees, onto your pear trees, and hibiscus plants, and all kinds of things. This fellow comes. That also can come up in a very bad way, and this is another common infection that we have. Generally, what I have tried since of late is I would try to avoid the Panatipata on this activity, try and see how bad it is, and then of course I would avoid spraying for these insects as much as possible. But if it becomes a bad infection on Jasma Bodhin Vahanse, of course I won't take a risk, because Jasma Bodhin Vahanse itself is, as you know, 2000 odd years old. It's a weak tree. There have been no genetical recombinations. It's the same germplasm, and it has not been able to withstand the environmental changes that has gone on for the last 2000 odd years. Therefore, we have to look after Jasma Bodhin Vahanse just like your own eyes. Now, that is where I might risk the Panatipata and spray the Bodhin Vahanse as a last resort. The last time when this was coming up, what we did was we didn't spray the Jasma Bodhin Vahanse, but we sprayed all the other bow trees and it controlled the infection. So that's one thing that we do. I got a very special sprayer from Japan once when I went that sprays up to about 60 feet, and then we would be able to control these insects at that time. Certain other things like what we happened recently was the white ant infections. The white ant started coming up. Once I did the resoiling of the Jasma Bodhin Vahanse in 1985, what I was able to do was, at that time, we were using a deadly chemical called aldrin. Now, I used aldrin to wet all the soils that were underneath. And we never had any white ant infections for 30 years. But over the last few years, we suddenly found these white ants appearing like this. Of course, we were looking for all kinds of things. We used the abalapittas and all kinds of local things, nothing worked. So then I asked the agrochemical companies whether they would have anything. One of the companies that came up was the Haleys. Mr. Gangoda came up with this thing. He spent a lot of his time and energy and found that there is a bait developed in Australia that is non-toxic. And the bait, they would leave the bait inside these particular and then the white ants would come to these kind of cavities and then carry this food to the queen, and the queen will not die, but queen will stop laying eggs. As a result, the colony will go down. And this is another trial that we did in a nearby boatry. We put this container, and the container filled with this kind of purple-like, paste-like, white paste-like thing filled. And then, of course, these ants would come and collect it and then take it to the queen. This is that kind of container, and they have a special kind of a timber that would attract the white ants, and into that they fill this kind of paste that they import. It's very expensive. One full treatment would cost almost $500,000, and that's the present head of the Hades who is handling this section, Mr. Sirigamage, and then of course that's he himself treating these boat trees that were around Sri Maha Bodhi. This is the person who handled it in Anuradhapura. And then, of course, we managed to control Jasma Bodhin Mahanse, protect the Jasma Bodhin Mahanse from the white ants. White ants would eat all the leaves and all the roots, and then, of course, would damage the boat. One other problem that I came across about 15 years ago was every time the new flush came up and the new twigs, the new greenish twigs that came up, I was observing a kind of a shrinking of the stem. So I was observing this for nearly 3 years, and then I was looking for plant physiologists, and then suddenly found Professor Kushan Tennakon. Kushan, some of you may know him. Professor Kushan Tennakon is a Sri Lankan. He's one of the renowned botanists, plant physiologist, now in Australia. He was in Papua New Guinea. He built an entire plant sciences department for Papua New Guinea. Now he has moved to Australia. When I spoke to him, he was at one time he was one of my students. He's a Trinitian. He said, when I spoke to him, he said, he listened to the problem. He said, "Uncle, it looks a little serious. I'll come." So within the next month, he came to Sri Lanka to see this. And then, of course, his parents are living in Kandy. And then, of course, we went to Anuradhapura and observed this for a couple of days. And then he, during that time, he did a lot of other scientific things within his purview as a senior professor. And he brought a lot of equipment. And he then, of course, said, "Uncle, this looks like an exosmosis situation, which I predicted from the beginning." And then, of course, the next thing was, he wanted me to collect soil, the water samples from all the water resources. And then we brought it to Kandy, Water Resources Department. And then they analyzed the water and the conductivity of all this water from Reservoir, and then the water that was being brought from another source into Srima Bodhiya, as well as the well that is within the temple premises, were found to be extremely high in conductivity. So this was causing this exosmosis situation. And then immediately he recommended we go for rainwater harvesting. So then, of course, this was going to be a very big activity. And then Nayaka Hamduro gave his approval. Atamasthana committee gave the approval. And then, of course, he was a scientist who did this. And then, of course, a gentleman from Kurunagal, Jaya Samarthung, Jairuan Samarthung, his son, is entrepreneur. All the button mushrooms you buy at supermarkets in blue, white and blue packets is his product. Great scientist, great entrepreneur. He came up with the thing. And then, of course, this is all what I said all this time. He went and established a rainwater harvesting system on the Mada Pansala. There are 3 pansalas in the Atamasthana in the Srima Bodhiya now. The entire roof was used, and he collected water firstly into one tank, right? And it gets filtered, and then this is this tank stands on this particular stage, goes into the second tank, which is now a filter, and goes into another third tank after filtering into 21,000 liters of filtered, unpolluted rainwater. And Mr. Samarthung established a piping system to take the water right to the top of Srima Bodhiya. And for the last so many years, from 2016 onward, we are using this water for the Jaya Srima Bodhi Mahanse, and that has brought in very positive results. The last but not least, this is my last activity with the Jaya Srima Bodhi Mahanse, which I undertook on the 19th of November 2020. As I told you, this is the outcome of the new branch, the very active, very strong new branch. So what I sort of dream is that if we root this branch in situ, right? If we root this branch in situ, right? The Jaya Srima Bodhi Mahanse will have another supplement of nutrients from this. And then we'll raise the entire Malua by another 3.5 feet with the new Rainwater coming up, I have built the Rainwater wall to accommodate that other 3.5 feet. The day this roots, I think the Udamalua will fill all this area and make sure that the future Bodhin Vahanse will come out of this particular branch. So this is all the work that I have done with the Jasma Bodhin Vahanse over the last 40 odd years. And I think I was very lucky because I think I was sent for this particular noble task because I was born in Anuradhapura near the old hospital, which is near Wanwalisaya. And my childhood was spent on the southern side of Jasma Bodhin. That's where our house was. The foundation is still there. And of course, I was working hard during my A-levels to become a doctor, to go and do medicine. But even during my third try, I was 1 mark less. And then I had to end up doing biological science. And then, of course, doing biological sciences, I was very unhappy. And then, of course, as some of you know, I had a long-standing girlfriend. So from Visakha, of course, Professor Manori knows. And then, of course, we got married. We were trying to go to Canada. She migrated to Canada because her aunt was there. But it was not possible for me to migrate. So I was doing plant research. And then finally, after 2.5 years of efforts to go to Canada, it didn't work. And then suddenly a position of the curator of the botanical gardens came up. I applied for the job. And then after a laborious process of 6 months, I was unanimously selected for this post. And then, of course, finally, my Daiva brought me to look after this Jasma Bodhin Vahanse. I think this is my samsara journey. So this is what I want to say. I'm very thankful to my mother who bore me in her womb, giving birth in that place. And then my father, who was a very religious person in all these temples, and all my brothers and sisters who supported me right the way through in all these activities. All my friends, my wife, my children have all been involved in this work. And of course, I'm very thankful to Ms. Chitra Mendis, who initially translated my book quite voluntarily into English. And then I have to go through that and print it. And then, of course, Professor Senayaka, who really got me to come and do this lecture to the benefit of all the members of the Dhamma. So therefore, I'm very thankful to all of you. I hope I made my life's work somewhat clear. If there is anything not clear, I'm very willing to answer any questions. Thank you very much. Teruvam Saranai.
Thank you very much.